Welcome everybody to this Global Fund session. Today's info session is on the system demonstration for the Grant Cycle 8 Classic and Grant Ready funding requests in the partner portal. So the intention of today's session will be to walk CCMs through the GC8 funding request submission process. Now, before I continue ahead, we just wanted to note for anybody that is French or Spanish speaking that our session today over the next 1 hour to 90 minutes, we will be coordinating the session in English. But for anybody that would like live captions available in Spanish or French, you are able to follow the instructions in front of you to set those live captions. So in order to do so, please go to the 3 dots at the top of your screen that allow you in Teams to open up more actions. Within this more actions tab, please go to the language and speech setting, which will then allow you to click on show live captions. Once you have clicked on show live captions, you will then be able to see live captions at the bottom of your screen. And once that's done, you can then click on language settings indicated by the gear icon at the bottom of the page to then select what is your preferred language that you would like the English voice to be translated into. So you will be able to translate all of the audio within the session into either Spanish or French or any of the other languages that are available through Teams. Now, my colleague Bonnie has just put in a screenshot in the chat as well for you to help follow along on how to access translated captions. Please note we will be sharing a recording of this session once it has been concluded, and we will share it with all of the CCA members participating today. Now, to proceed ahead. So today's info session over the next hour and a half or so will be a system demonstration on the Grant Cycle 8 Classic or Grant Ready funding request submissions on behalf of the CCM. As some of you are aware, we have made a change for Grant Cycle 8, which is to facilitate the CCM submission of the funding request through the partner portal. This partner portal represents over 2 years of researching and planning, and it covers over 1,000 applicant surveys, 200 data points, and extensive conversations with key stakeholders such as the CCM Design Group, as well as the PR Forum. Our intention with this new funding request module/app within the partner portal is to provide a centralized location where CCMs can access their funding request. They can access all of the relevant funding request documents that are required to be submitted. And additionally, they will be able to attach all final documents and submit their funding request to the Global Fund through this new portal. Please feel free to type in any questions that you have into the chat in either English, French, or Spanish. My colleagues will indicate questions that have been seen, and we will have time at the end for a question and answer session where we will go through all of the questions that have been posed and answer them at the end of the session. Moving forward, so this is our agenda for today. So first, we will cover really some of the key changes in the GC8 funding request submission process. We will then move over to showing the classic funding request submission process that many of you CCMs are aware of from previous cycles. And we will do a short demo to show how that funding request submission will now look like in the new funding request module within the partner portal. We will then cover Grant Ready funding request process, which is a new submission pathway for Grant Cycle 8. And we will also then cover what are the key differences between this new submission pathway of Grant Ready funding request versus the classic funding request process that many of you CCMs are already aware of. Finally, we will share some resources with all of you to help you alongside the funding request development over these next few weeks/months. And then finally, we will have some time for Q&A, so question and answers for any questions that have been raised in the chat. And again, feel free to raise these questions in either English, Spanish, or French. And we will do our best to answer all of them at the end. So to begin, we want to just discuss with all of the CCMs what are the key changes in Grant Cycle 8. Now, in front of you, you can see that we have a list of objectives. And we should begin by saying that Grant Cycle 8 is not an incremental adjustment over Grant Cycle 7. It really represents a structural break from previous cycles. We are all operating in an environment of materially tighter constraints, and every investment needs to be justified against a sharpened strategic lens. And every process to achieve these investments must be effective and efficient as possible. So for this session, we really wanted to focus in on the second and third objectives that you can see in front of you, which is around having strong applications and timely grant signing within compressed timelines, especially for funding requests that will be coming in either Windows 1, 2, or 3 this year, as well as having improved data quality through our partner portal and online management. We really wanted to build on the partner portal to be a centralized location where CCMs can find all of the funding request related information relevant in their interactions with the Global Fund. Now, this session will focus primarily on the processes and portal changes for classic and grant funding requests. And we really want to emphasize this new change of funding requests now being managed through the partner portal. Some CCMs that have had experience from previous cycles will remember sharing documents through a CCM URL, so a SharePoint location. However, now all core documents will be submitted through the Global Fund Partner Portal. In case of grant-ready funding request, which we will describe a bit more in detail, there will be some core documents such as the performance framework and the budget that will be filled out by principal recipients as part of the funding request process. So really, we've tried to encompass all of these changes in this session for you today. And we will talk about the requirements and the guidance for all of the submission pathways, and as well, what are the steps that CCMs will need to take over the next few days, few weeks, few months. So to move ahead, we first wanted to talk about in GC8 the difference between application approaches versus submission pathways. Now, application approaches refers to the required documents and the differentiated TRP review used to access funding. In GC8, we will have a variety of application approaches continuing from previous cycles, such as full review or tailored for focused or tailored for transition, depending on if you're high impact or core portfolio or if you're a focused portfolio. So the application approaches really dictate what type of documents the CCM will need to submit as part of their funding request submission. It also covers within the application approach how the TRP is revolved and how the TRP will review your funding request. Now, this is something similar to what we've had in the previous cycles. Something new for Grant Cycle 8, however, is the introduction of submission pathways. And submission pathways refers to the processes and stakeholder roles for developing and submitting the funding request application. So this will be which steps should the CCM follow and who exactly is involved with the funding request submission. So in this case, the application approach would refer to the what. So really what is involved or what is contained in the funding request submission, the list of documents that then the TRP will review. And then the grant-ready funding request and the classic funding request, which are referring to the submission pathways, will talk about how the CCMs will submit these documents and what are the different steps involved. So moving over, again, here we have the focus of today's session that you can see in front of you. So the application approaches, as I mentioned just now, define the available pathways. So here at the top, you can see full review, tailored for transition, as well as tailored for focus. Now, for the submission pathways, as I mentioned, we will focus on classic funding request as well as grant-ready funding request, which will either of the pathways will be applied to the full review, tailored for transition, or the tailored for focused application approaches. The other submission pathways that we see in front of us that are grayed out are by invitation only, and more information will be provided to those applicants. So you need not worry about any of these other submission pathways that you can see here, such as program continuation or investment priorities request. All of the process descriptions for what these submission pathways will be covered now in the subsequent slides. So first, we want to talk a bit about and reiterate the classic funding request submission pathway that will happen in the partner portal. Now, many of you CCMs are already used to this classic funding request submission process, just not the partner portal yet. Essentially here, the CCM will develop the funding request package, including a consolidated performance framework and budget. Here, the CCM is encouraged to engage early with the PRs, but the PRs are not involved in developing a performance framework or budget. So as we can see here, first, as the allocation letters have gone out a few weeks ago already, the CCM must complete a submission pathway and PR nomination form. In this form, the CCM, aka you guys, will inform the global fund of which components are part of the funding request, as well as which submission pathway the CCM would like to take, whether classic or grant ready, which I will cover in the next slide. In addition, in this form, the CCM can also select which TRP window they would like to come for, Windows 1, 2, or 3, for which I will share the timelines also in a few slides over. Once the CCM has completed this form, this will then allow the global fund to internally start and create the funding request. This funding request, the country team will then share with you, and this funding request will then be available for the CCMs to access within the partner portal. CCMs will be able to download the funding request package in the partner portal, and then they will be able to complete the documents as normal, like in the past. Once these documents are completed, we move to step 3, where the CCM will then attach all the document and submit their funding request package in the partner portal. Once the CCM has submitted this package in the partner portal, the Global Fund country team will then submit the funding request to the TRP, for which the TRP will do the review, and then ideally grant making will start. This will really help us to ensure that a rigorous funding request process is completed, and especially in cases of significant changes to investment priorities or implementation arrangements. Now, a note here is that for any applicants that would like to nominate a new principal recipient, it will not be possible. If you want to nominate a new principal recipient, or if you're choosing the classic pathway, you would opt for this classic submission pathway process. And a reminder for any CCMs planning to register for a TRP window in 2026 to please confirm your submission pathway and TRP window to country teams through the designated form no later than 30 days after receiving the allocation letter. Now, moving over to, I think, one of the most important slides for this session. Here are the key steps for the grant-ready funding request submission pathway. So here in this submission pathway, the CCM will nominate existing principal recipients who will develop grant-ready performance frameworks and budgets that will be included as part of the CCM's funding request submission. So really, this is one of the big changes. In the classic submission pathway that many of you CCMs are used to, you will attach all of the final documents, including you will also be submitting the CCM completed performance framework and budget. However, in the grant-ready funding request, the PRs, if they're existing, will be involved now to develop grant-ready PFs and detailed budget. The main benefits of this is that it will really expedite grant negotiations by bringing in the PRs much earlier to work on these grant documents. This will also reduce manual rework, so having to do a performance framework and budget at the funding request stage and then potentially having to redo it for the grant making stage. And most importantly, it really ensures strong grant design from the start, from the funding request development itself. So here on this high-level process map that we see in front of us, so the first step will be the same for CCMs. So CCMs will complete this form of submission pathway and PR nominations, which is available in all 3 languages for CCMs to fill out and send back to their country teams. Then country teams will then share the funding request with the applicant so that CCMs can open your funding request and download any documents that the Global Fund has forms for within that funding request, apart from the performance framework and the budget. This is because as part of step 3, the country team in parallel will share the grant level PF and the budget directly with the PR. So in this case of grant ready funding request, no performance framework or budget will be shared with the CCM, because the expectation is that in a grant ready funding request, the existing PR that has been nominated will complete a grant level performance framework and budget already at the time of funding request submission. So within this step 3, the PR will complete and submit a grant level PF. This grant level PF will be available to them online, but then the version that the CCM receives will be in Excel. And then similar to previous cycles, the PRs will continue to complete the budget in an Excel file, which will also be sent to the CCMs. In certain cases, the principal recipients, as part of the funding request submission, will also complete and fill out an online HPMT, which will be sent to the Global Fund directly. So the CCMs will not be involved for this. Here again, we want to reiterate that for grant-ready funding requests, that any PRs that are involved will need to be existing and continuing PRs from grant cycle 7. So again, the big difference for grant-ready funding request is that CCMs will still continue to develop the entire funding request package. The big difference being that for grant-ready, it will be the principal recipients that will complete the performance framework and budget. So the CCMs will not be completing a performance framework / budget as part of the grant ready funding request. You will, of course, however, be receiving the performance framework and budget from the principal recipient once the principal recipient has completed it, so that you can include both of these grant level documents that have been completed by the principal recipient as part of your overall funding request submission. And so that we can see here in step 5 of the grant ready funding request. Like the previous slide, here the CCM will submit the full application package via the partner portal. So irrespective of which submission pathway you decide to choose, the CCM will be responsible for still submitting the full funding request application package. Just in Grant Ready, you will be receiving the PF and DB, the performance framework and the budget from the principal recipients, rather than having to work on it yourselves. Now, as we've mentioned quite a bit now, so again, funding requests will be managed through the partner portal. So this will mean you as the CCMs will be able to access all funding request documents in the partner portal. And then once the documents have been completed, you will be able to submit your documents through the partner portal as well. This partner portal really is an external facing Global Fund platform that CCMs can use to communicate and share deliverables with the Global Fund, of course, including the PRs in case of grant ready funding request. And again, we will cover a bit more information. Now, with the funding request application being available in the partner portal, it is really important that CCMs and PRs, if they're involved, are updating grant entity data to ensure that it is accurate and up to date for grant cycle 8. CCMs will be able to provide CCM members or CCM non-members access to the partner portal through the GED module that is currently there. Now, having GED up to date is important so that everybody who is involved with the funding request documents and needs to either download them or attach them is in the grant entity data system so that the necessary access can be provisioned. Now, for this new funding request module in the partner portal, CCMs will be able to either select users to be editors or submitters. The editor role will provide users the ability to access documents by downloading them, to then, of course, complete them outside the portal, and then, of course, also to then attach the documents once they're ready. The submitter role will provide exactly the same permissions, except the big difference will be that the submitters, like the name suggests, can also submit the application package to the Global Fund, which editors will not be able to do. So here, first, we encourage CCM, especially the admin focal points that are here with us today, to then access the partner portal and log in to the GED portal to ensure that the entire grant entity data is up to date for your CCM. Please also make sure that in grant entity data or GED, that all CCM admin focal points are accurately captured in GED. The Global Fund has provided automatically all admin focal points access to the funding request module in the partner portal as submitters. So if there are anybody that are here as part of the CCM, as part of the CCM as admin focal points, you will have already been given access to the new funding request module, where you will see funding requests once they have been shared by the Global Fund. If there are any new users that you would like to provide access for, or any existing users that are in GED that have not been provided access to the funding request module, you will be able to update them through the grant entity data. Here you are also able to add consultants or any other existing members that you would like to provide access to the funding request module. For grant-ready funding requests, the PR access and completion and submission of grant level forms will be done through the grant making module in the partner portal. And this is something that we will also reiterate with principal recipients. Now, for the next part of the session, I would just like to show you a quick demo of how CCMs can provide either new or existing users access to the new funding request module in the partner portal. And again, as a reminder, we've already given all active CCM admin focal points access to the funding request module as a submitter. So again, if you have a new admin focal point that needs access as a submitter, or you have a new consultant that needs to be added as an editor, you can follow these steps.
This demonstration will show how a CCM admin focal point grants access to the funding request module in the partner portal. This is done through the Grant Entity Data app. Access can be given to anyone associated with the CCM. Note that CCM admin focal points already have access to the funding request module in the partner portal. Once logged in, click on the menu at the top left. Next, click on Grant Entity Data. To manage the CCM database, open the Organization Information tab. Select the relevant organization. You can grant access to the funding request module when creating a new contact or updating an existing one. For this demonstration, we'll grant access by creating a new contact. Click Create Contact. A pop-up window will appear prompting you to enter the contact information. Click Next. Select the type of member. In this example, we'll choose non-member. Click Next. Now select the role and recipient status. To grant access to the funding request module, make sure to check the box labeled Access to Grant Deliverables. Without this permission, the user will not be able to open any funding requests shared by the Global Fund. Next, choose the Grant Deliverables access type. There are two options: the editor, who can access, complete and attach documents to the partner portal, and the submitter, who has all editor permissions but can also submit the application package through the partner portal. It is recommended that each CCM has at least two submitters, and that one of them is the CCM admin focal point. Additional editors or submitters can be added by the CCM as needed. Once you've made your selection, click Next. No supporting document is required for CCM editors or submitters, so you can click Next. And then click Next once more to complete the contact creation process. You will now see a confirmation message indicating that the request was successfully submitted. click Finish. To view the change request, click the Change Request tab. Click on the change request. Here, you'll see that the change request is pending Global Fund review. The CCM will receive a notification when it has been validated by the Global Fund.
Now, moving over, before we talk about how the grant-ready funding request submission process will look like in the system, I will invite my colleagues from within the Global Fund to speak briefly about the performance framework as well as the budget that will be available for CCMs in the funding request application.
Thank you, Nikhil. My name is Alona Alba, and I'm specialist in the operational efficiency team. And as Nikhil just shared, I would like to also walk you through some of the key changes that would be applicable for the performance framework and in the budget in the context of the GC8. So let me start with the process for the classic funding request. So when it comes to the submission pathway of the classic funding request, the CCMs will be expected to download the forms that will be made available for them in the partner portal. One of them is the Excel performance framework, and this Excel performance framework will be specifically tailored to the funding request. So all the required information in relation to the funding request will be already captured there. As a next step, the CCM will download the Excel and will complete the Excel PF form outside of the portal in the consultation with the in-country stakeholders. The moment that this process is completed, then the CCM will attach the final Excel PF in the partner portal for the submission. The moment that the full application process and the full package is finalized, and I will talk about the budget in a minute, the performance framework will be submitted to the Global Fund as part of the funding request, and the Excel performance framework will be automatically imported, and the data quality checks will be performed in the system. The Global Fund will then complete the online performance framework review and will also perform the check on the data quality review outcomes. At that point of time, if there are any edits or modifications or potentially requests for submission, the CCM will be informed. Now, as we move to the next submission pathway, which is the grant-ready funding request captured here above, as Nikhil has mentioned, we have a step which also requires the principal recipients to complete the forms as part of the grant-ready submission pathway. So when it comes to the principal recipients, the moment that the application materials have been shared with the CCM, at the same point of time, the principal recipients that have been confirmed for the grant-ready submission pathway will be also equally invited to access the partner portal, and they will have a link in their notification through which they will be able to access the partner portal. There, they will complete the online performance framework for each grant in the partner portal. And we will be also showing for the principal recipient in the info session for the principal recipient how that process is expected to look like and what are the key steps to complete there in the partner portal. What is really, really important here is that the submission of the performance framework for PRs will need to take place online. So this is the final submission that we expect the principal recipients to complete. And as a collaboration file in case of consultations that the principal recipient would like to have a snapshot of the information that has been already entered in the partner portal, they will be able to take an Excel collaboration file from the partner portal to facilitate those conversations in country. When the principal recipient will submit the performance framework in the partner portal, the CCM will be immediately informed, and the Excel PF with the information that has been submitted by the principal recipient will be shared in the partner portal with the CCM. When it comes to the CCM review of the performance framework that has been submitted, they will download a copy of the completed performance framework from the principal recipient that was submitted, and they will do so in the form of Excel, and they will complete their review. The moment that the CCM agrees and accepts the performance framework that has been shared, they will finalize the application process, and they will mark that this performance framework that has been submitted is the final, and they will do so in the partner portal, and then they will proceed with the submission to the Global Fund. Or in alternative cases, or when a process would be not yet completed and the resubmission will be required, the CCM will have an option to request PR to resubmit the performance framework. When it comes to the Global Fund stage, the moment that the full application material for the funding request has been submitted, the CCM, as I mentioned, will mark the files as final. The Global Fund is immediately informed upon submission, and the review of the online PF is taking place with the subsequent completion of the data quality checks outcomes. If there are any further modifications or updates that would be required, the Global Fund will request a resubmission from the principal recipient and the CCM. So now we will move to the budget, and through the process of the classic funding request submission pathway, the process is very, very similar here. When the CCM will be downloading the budget, the Excel budget, that will be made available as soon as the application for funding request link has been shared in the partner portal. And yet again here, the Excel budget is tailored specifically to the funding request with all the relevant information already captured in the form. The CCM then completes the Excel budget, also in the consultation with the in-country stakeholders, and the moment that the version is final, the CCM can attach that final version in the portal for submission. The moment that the full package has been finalized, and when it comes to the review of the Global Fund, the Excel budget will be immediately made available upon submission to the Global Fund. That information will be automatically imported in the Global Fund system, and will be subsequent data quality checks that will be run. What is really important is that the country team and the Global Fund, they will be able to see the outcomes of the data quality checks, and they will be able to request the resubmission from the CCM in case it will need to be completed. Now, when it comes to the grant-ready submission pathway, the process here is equally similar for the principal recipient. So principal recipient will have access to their budget in the form of Excel the moment that the forms have been shared with principal recipient. The principal recipient will download, complete, and attach the Excel budget for the respective grant in the portal. At that point of time, the information and the data that was captured in the budget will be automatically imported, and the summary budget will be visualized for the PRs to immediately see the result. At the same time, the data quality checks are being run for the principal recipients to complete any corrections that will be required before submitting that budget to the CCM through the partner portal. Once the data quality checks have been completed and addressed, the PR submits the Excel budget to the CCM in the partner portal. Then we move to the country coordinating mechanisms and the process that they will follow once the Excel has been completed and was submitted. In such case, the CCM will immediately visualize the budget in the partner portal. They will be able to download it and to review it. If the budget is accepted and no further modifications will be required, the CCM will complete the application package and will submit the documents and the funding request application to the Global Fund. Upon submission, the Global Fund also will review the Excel budget that has been submitted, review the data quality checks with the summary budget visualization, and in case it will be required, will request resubmission from the PR or CCM to perform necessary adjustments. What is very important, and if I may just to go back to the previous slide, thank you so much, Nikhil. What is really important is that during grant making, the moment that both funding request processes and submission pathways have been completed, the PRs will have still the opportunity to further update and edit their respective budgets and the performance framework, irrespective of the previous funding request submission pathway that has been selected. So with that, I'm giving the floor back to Nikhil. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot for that, Ilona. So let's talk some timelines, right? We are already in April of this year. So we wanted to first of all cover the Windows 1 and 2 timings, especially for Window 1 that is coming up very shortly. So as the allocation letters have gone out already a few weeks ago, we would then really encourage all CCMs to update GED if you have not already done so. So again, if there are any new CCM admin focal points that are missing, please add them and provide them access as submitters to the funding request application. Or if there are any other new members, for example, consultants or other CCM members, please remember to add them. And of course, if they need access to the funding request module in the partner portal for either downloading or attaching documents, please also remember to update GED and to provide the necessary users the necessary permissions through GED. So again, we really encourage CCMs to update GED now to the best of their ability. For Window 1, which we will look at first in the top half of this visual. So for Window 1, the submission deadline is 8th June, which is just about 2 months away from today. And again, so really not a lot of time. And to kind of kickstart this process, again, a reminder to please fill out your submission pathway and PR nomination form as quickly as possible and send it to the CT no later than 30 days after receiving your allocation letter. This will allow the country teams to then proceed with creating the funding request record and then sharing this funding request with you in the partner portal so that you are able to then download all of these documents and then start working on them so that you can attach them and submit them to the Global Fund before 8th of June if you're deciding to come for Window 1. So really the earlier that CCMs can complete and share this form with the CTs, the quicker the Global Fund will be able to share the funding request with you and all of the accompanying funding request forms that then need to be filled out and submitted as part of the funding request package. As a reminder, for Grant Ready, you will of course need to nominate existing PR and engage the PR over these next few months so that they are able to then share with you a Grant Ready performance framework and Grant Ready detailed budget that the CCMs will then submit alongside all the other funding request documents that CCMs have worked on by the submission deadline of 8th of June. The TRP review will then start in the latter half of June and continuing up until July, after which the TRP will make their recommendation for either the funding request to proceed to grant making or iteration. And of course, in the cases of grant making, then the PRs will be involved. So from the latter half of July onwards for Window 1. For Window 2, we have the submission deadline for CCMs being 27th of July. So this gives the months of April, May, June, and July to do the funding request development. But of course, especially for Grant Ready, please complete the submission pathway and PR nomination form as soon as possible and share it with your country teams. And again, the Window 2 submission deadline is 27th July. If you're deciding to come to either of these windows, please fill out the form, which will let the CT know which components the funding request will have, which submission pathway, so either a classic funding request, as maybe you've done in previous cycles, or if you opt to do a grant-ready funding request by nominating an existing PR to develop a grant-ready performance framework and budget. So moving over, here are some immediate next steps for funding requests for these upcoming TRP windows. As we've mentioned already a few times, and again, we want to reiterate, please, for the CCM admin focal points, set up editor or submitter access for any other new or existing CCM users. CCMs can also plan meetings with the PRs to discuss potential PR nomination, as well as to discuss internally the program split and as well the submission pathway that they would like to take for the funding request. So please remember to plan country dialogue meetings as inputs to define these priorities. And again, to submit this form as soon as you can. For PRs that are involved in a grant-ready funding request, after the PRs have been nominated, if it's needed, they will need to add new editors and submitters for the completion of the online PF that will be available for them, grant level PF, as well as the HPMT in certain cases. And then finally, PRs will complete and submit their grant level PF and their budget and share it with the CCMs. And then once the CCMs have received this, they will then be able to submit their funding request package like normal. And one last reminder for CCMs that for any currently existing CCM admin focal points, we have already given all active existing CCM admin focal points access to the funding request module as submitters. So for any of these existing CCM admin focal points, you do not need to raise a change request in GED for yourself because the access has already been provisioned. You will only need to do it for any new users, so including new CCM admin focal points, or for any other existing users, whether that is chair, vice chair, members, non-members, alternates, etc. Now, for the next part of the demo for the session, we will just walk you through over 10 minutes of how the classic funding request submission pathway will work and how you will be able to interact with the new funding request module in the partner portal. So again, here we have the focus of today's session where the CCM will be able to complete this form. Once this form has been completed, the Global Fund will then create a funding request record and then share it with the CCM to then access in the partner portal. And then this will then allow the CCM to attach the to download documents, and then once they're completed outside of the portal, to then attach them in the portal and then submit the final funding request package. There will be more detailed information coming for all of the grant making steps at a later stage.
When you click on the email notification to log into the partner portal to access the funding request, you'll find a list of your country's active and completed funding requests. This view appears after a funding request has been created. Here, you can see key details such as the country, the components involved, proposed dates, the review window, and the application approach. If a TRP review is required, it will be clearly indicated. At the bottom of the page, you'll find the current status of the funding request. To enter, click the funding request. At the top, the chevron displays the 6 steps of the funding request process. The first 2 steps have already been completed by the Global Fund. Because the Global Fund has shared the funding request package, the current step, Applicant to Submit Funding Request, is highlighted in blue. To begin funding request development, click on the Download tab. The Download tab allows the CCM to download documents shared by the country team, including the Performance Framework, Budget, and the Prioritized Above Allocation Request, also known as PAR. To download a document, click the icon on the far right of the table. Choose a download location and save the file. Additional documents are available under Other Supporting Documents. The documents listed here must be used when indicated, such as the CCM endorsement. Where no standard form is provided, CCMs may attach the relevant file in any format. After downloading all required documents from the partner portal, the CCM completes them offline. When the CCM is ready to submit, they return to the Attach and Submit tab. The Attach and Submit tab displays all document requirements for the funding request. At the bottom of the tab, under Funding Request Documents, click Attach to upload completed documents. A pop-up window allows up to 10 files to be uploaded at a time. Select files from your local drive and upload them. Once the upload is complete, assign the document type and language for each document. Then click Save and Close. The document list updates automatically, changing icons from a red X to a yellow check mark, which indicates that a document has been attached but not yet marked as final. The CCM must now designate which documents are part of the final submission. Selecting this option changes the icon from a yellow check mark to a green one. The CCM can now submit the funding request by clicking Submit Funding Request to the Global Fund. A confirmation screen will appear. If any required documents are missing, the CCM must provide a justification to proceed. The CCM will then be able to submit the funding request. After submission, the page refreshes and a message confirms that the funding request has been submitted to the Global Fund. The chevron advances to Global Fund to review funding request. At this point, the funding request is locked for the CCM. They can no longer attach or delete documents, but they can still view and download files already included in the submission. When the Global Fund has reviewed and submitted the funding request to the TRP, the chevron will move to the next status. After the Global Fund has shared the TRP outcome with the CCM, the funding request review outcome will be updated to grant making, and the final status will be completed in the chevron.
So this concludes the demo of the classic submission pathway for your funding request submission. Again, really a big reminder to make sure that you update GED so that once the Global Fund has shared the funding request with the CCM, then any applicable users will be able to log on to the partner portal, and then they will see their funding requests that have been shared with them in the partner portal itself within the funding request module. The classic funding request, it follows a similar process as in previous cycles. So again, here the CCMs will be responsible for downloading all the documents, completing all the documents, and attaching the final documents, including the performance framework and the budget, as part of their funding request submission to the Global Fund, which will then be reviewed by the technical review panel, aka the TRP. Now moving to the next section, my colleague Ilona will kindly walk over the grant ready funding request process, as well as the key differences in the system for your funding request submission. Thanks, Ilona. Over to you.
Thank you, Nikhil. All right. So as we have seen earlier, Nikhil has presented the process for the classic funding request submission pathway. And right now, I will briefly explain to you what are the key differences between the classic and the grant-ready funding request. So this slide we have seen earlier, and this slide summarizes the process for the grant-ready funding request submission pathway. And what is really, really important here is the process begins with the CCM at the moment that the CCM completes and defines the components that will be determined for the specific funding request. They confirm their submission pathway, and they also identify which TRP window the CCM would like to present their application, and then communicates that with the submission pathway and PR nomination form. The moment that this process has been completed, soon after, the CCM receives the notification from the Global Fund with a link to access the partner portal. The process that Nikhil has just presented and the demonstration for the steps to be completed for the CCMs are very, very similar to the ones that they will be completing for the grant-ready submission pathway. The only key difference here is the box that we highlight in green, which outlines the steps that the PR will be completing in order to ensure that the funding request application package is complete. So PR will be receiving the forms from with the link from the Global Fund notification to access the online performance framework and to download Budget Excel and to complete those and submit to the CCM via the partner portal. Now, what is really important to flag here is, once again, the PRs are expected to complete the online performance framework, and the moment that they do so, that online performance framework is shared in form of Excel with the CCM. The PR will be also completing the Excel budget and will be also submitting this to the CCM. And the final point is the online HPMT, which is also available for the PRs to complete. And this form is being sent directly to the Global Fund. So if we move to the next slide, here we will explain to you what are the key differences and what actually stays the same between those two submission pathways. So first of all, what is the same for both is that the CCM will be completing the submission pathway and PR nomination form. As mentioned earlier, in the form, they will complete the definition of the window selection, the submission, confirmation of the submission pathway choice, the components for funding request, and of course, the PR nomination. In both submission pathways, the CCM accesses the tailored application package via the partner portal. So what that means is all the requirements will be predefined for you in the funding request in the partner portal, so you can immediately see what are the expectations and start working on those documents. And in both submission pathways, the CCMs will be equally submitting the application package via the partner portal, as per shown in the demonstration made by Nikhil. The changes that would be applicable for grant-ready funding request submission pathway are captured here on the left. So in that specific submission pathways, the CCMs must nominate PRs early in order to inform the PR selection, but also allow the PRs to complete their deliverables on time. The PRs will complete and share grant-level forms via partner portal. And as we mentioned earlier, there will be a dedicated information session for PRs to explain them of the required process. The PRs will be expected to complete the online performance framework, the Excel budget, and the online HPMT if it will be required. Please note the online HPMT is being directly submitted to the Global Fund with the output included in the budget. The CCM then, upon submission of those forms, will mark the PF and budgets from the PR as final, as was demonstrated by Nikhil earlier. The moment that they complete this process and they submit the funding application to the Global Fund is being informed and starts the review process. With respect to the nuances and particular notes for the classic funding request submission pathway, which is captured on your right, is that the CCM is highly encouraged to nominate PRs early, even if your particular funding request is coming for not specifically a TRP window 1, but we highly encourage to make sure that you work and start this process as early as possible. The CCM completes a single performance framework and a budget covering all components in the funding request for the classic funding request submission pathway. So this is very important to flag. And the online HPMT can be optionally requested and completed by the principal recipients to provide inputs into the budget. Or as an alternative, the CCM can also provide an estimated health product figures directly in the budget at the funding request stage. And the CCM will attach those final forms upon completion and will submit them directly in the partner portal. When you evaluate what are the options for you that would be most applicable and would be most beneficial, and if you're considering the grant-ready funding request, we'd like to flag that it does expedite the grant negotiation, it reduces the manual rework, and also ensures that the grant design is strong from the start of the process. So we hope that this summary provides you valuable input and when you evaluate which submission pathway you would like to select. And we are then moving to the next segment. I think we are back to you, Nikhil, with resources. Thank you again.
Great, thank you. So now getting into the end parts of our session today, we just briefly wanted to cover over some of the resources that will be available to CCMs for your funding request development over the next few months. So we will definitely be sharing with you the recording of today's session, including the slide deck that was shared now as part of the presentation. In addition, through the resources that are available, you will find links for all of the other GC8 sessions, especially for the ones that have been organized for the different application approaches. In addition, you can also find resources around all of the application materials, which will be also available on the Global Fund website, and as well the CCM confirmation of submission pathway and PR nomination form template, which is brand new for Grant Cycle 8. In addition, you can find some supporting materials for the partner portal. So again, for all of the GED stuff, we will share with you some demo videos that we've created and that we were just sharing as part of the session, alongside a GED manual that will provide some step-by-step guidance on how you can update GED to provide either new or existing users access to the new funding request module in the partner portal. So all of these GED resources will be available for you. We will also be sharing with you very shortly a partner portal manual. So again, it's essentially a step-by-step guidance on everything that we've just covered here, letting CCMs know what are all the different steps that need to be done as part of their funding request submission. And then in addition, we will share with you some additional demo videos, which will provide you a concise walkthrough of the funding request submission pathways. Again, here we have a high-level process map for those of you that are interested, just to have a quick look at how the process will work like. We have the main funding request process happening throughout the middle of the section. For grant-ready funding request steps, we have from steps 5 to 10. And then otherwise, if you're following a classic funding request submission path, you can then skip over steps 5 to 10 and continue from 4 onwards to 11. And again, we will share more concise step-by-step guidance in our partner portal manual and demo videos for you to follow along with. Now we get to the last part of this session, which is the question and answer. I know there have been quite a few questions that have been coming in the chat. So I'm just going to reshare my screen and I will do my best alongside the help of my wonderful colleagues that have been collecting all of the questions and answers to go over some of the questions that have been posed in the chat for us today. So I will scroll to the end. So the first question that we had gotten in the chat was, can CCMs nominate multiple alternate PRs or new PRs? And for this, the essential answer is that the requirements for nominating PRs are not changing. In case there are multiple grants, a CCM can nominate more than one PR, and the PRs may be new, or they might be continuing, or a mix of the two. If the PRs are continuing, the CCMs will be able to choose the grant-ready funding request process. If it is not an existing one, then most likely you will have to follow the classic funding request process. Now, my colleagues have mentioned that there was some unclarity around alternate PRs, but they did flag that only PRs that the CCMs selects to implement the grants are those that should be communicated to the Global Fund as part of this new form that is to be submitted by the CCMs. The next question is, who will develop the funding request, CCMs or PRs? Now, in this case, all funding requests will be submitted by the CCM. For classic funding requests, the CCMs will complete and develop all funding request documents, including the performance framework and the budget. However, for grant-ready funding requests, the CCM will request the PR to prepare and submit grant-level performance framework and budget to share with the CCM. Other than those two, the CCMs will still be responsible to develop and submit all other funding request documents that are required for the package. So again, in both classic and grant-ready funding request, the CCM is responsible for consolidating the full funding request application package and submitting it to the Global Fund. The only caveat is that for grant-ready funding request, you will, as a CCM, be receiving a grant-ready performance framework and grant-ready budget that will be part of your funding request submission. The next question is, if we have already submitted the submission pathway and PR nomination form to the country team by email, should we already be able to see the funding request material in the partner portal now? If not, when should we expect those to appear in the partner portal? First of all, a big thanks to the CCMs that have already completed and submitted their submission pathway and PR nomination form to the country teams. As of today, no CCMs will be able to see the funding request, as none of them have been shared in the partner portal yet. However, as the answer suggests in front of you, within the next few days, perhaps a week or two for some other CCMs, you will receive a notification once the funding request has been shared by the country team in the partner portal. Within the partner portal, you will then be able to access the funding request homepage and then open up your funding request application, from where you can then access and download all of the necessary forms. So no worries if you are logging into the partner portal and you are not able to see your funding request yet. They will be made available to you in the next few upcoming days. The next question that we have is, does the confirmation of the principal recipient, aka PR, require approval through a full CCM meeting? In those cases, yes, the CCM is required to hold meetings to plan, discuss, and confirm PR nomination, documentation, various documentation, including the list of participants, decision points, decision-making criteria, alongside other things might be requested by the Global Fund when we're assessing compliance with CCM eligibility requirements. And please do note that for continuing PRs, it is not required for the CCM to publish a call for PR applications. Moving forward, so then we have the next question is, could a focal point play both roles, editor and submitter? So indeed, at the moment, it's not possible for an individual to have both editor and submitter, but that is because a submitter essentially can do everything an editor can do, plus a submitter has the ability to submit the funding request to the Global Fund. So in this case, a focal point would not need both roles because it is interpreted that as a submitter, the admin focal point will be able to do everything that the editor can do and more, which is to submit the funding request. The next question that we have is, can we also receive a PDF version of the pathway and PR nomination form so that the broader CCM can review the fields together before we proceed in filling it out? Indeed, there is a template that is available on the website. And again, we will share links to the form in all of the resource materials that we will share with you shortly. To all the CCMs. But yes, there will be a version available for you to then complete and fill out. Now, moving over to the next questions, and for this, I will maybe just share my other screen. So quite a lot of questions, but great to see them all come in. The next question is, how would CCMs contribute to the development of PF and budgets in the case of grant-ready funding requests? So indeed, when the PRs are responsible for creating these grant-level documents. Also, this HPMT is not shared with the CCM. How would national inputs be validated? So indeed, the CCM is responsible for coordinating the country dialogue process through which priorities are agreed. The CCMs will also hold the coordination meetings with PRs as part of the country dialogue, so there's no change to this process whatsoever. However, of course, for grant-ready funding requests, the PRs are expected to closely collaborate when developing these documents in alignment with national priorities and in advance of submitting them officially through the portal. So ideally, the first time that you are receiving these grant level documents from the PR will not have been the first time you're seeing all of this information. And then finally, the HPMT can optionally be shared by the PR with the CCM to facilitate the review of the health product sections of the budget. Moving forward, we have a question on, again, the HPMT, mentioning that the HPMT forms parts of the budget, named as the HP budget. As the HPMT will be submitted online by the PR, does that mean that the funding request budget will not include an HP budget tab? So here we've mentioned that the funding request budget should include figures for health products. Within this, there's a few different scenarios. The first one is for focused portfolios, for which there is no HPMT required. And so in those cases, the health product budget that is developed in the budget tab will be part of the HP list focused tab in the funding request, developed by CCMs, and then for grant making by PRs. For the grant ready funding request, the PR develops the HPMT during the funding request and then uses it to populate the health product information in the budget. And within the budget, there's an output. And then within the HPMT, there's a budget output tab that will allow you to easily copy and paste this information. Now, in this third scenario of a classic funding request, if the PR is known and nominated early, the CCM can request the PR to not only to prepare only the HPMT, so no performance framework, no budget, and the PR can be new or continuing. In these cases, the budget is then extracted into an extractable format and then shared with the CCM to include as part of the consolidated funding request budget. And then finally, in the classic funding request, if the PR is not yet nominated, the CCMs can provide health product estimates in the funding request budget tab, which is non-HP. And this will be based on national quantifications. Moving over, we have then another question coming in on multi-country grants asking, are the procedures the same for multi-country grants? And for that, in principle, yes, all of these procedures are the same for multi-country grants, unless it's been noted otherwise within the operational policy note. And we will share more details for the applicable portfolios very shortly. Now we get to some of the last set of questions, which is the first one being, would it be possible to write the proposal in Portuguese? And again, in principle, we are saying yes, but please do reach out directly to your country team to confirm this and to as well discuss the next steps of your proposal. We then have a question around program continuation. So in the context of program continuation, what is the role of the CCM Proposal Development Committee? And what is the role and impact of country dialogue during program continuation? And is it mandatory? So within this development committee, CCMs are invited to use the program continuation application approach. Any CCM using this approach can hopefully, or they should, direct their questions to the CTs. So we will try to take this on a case-by-case basis. And so for any questions that you have, feel free to raise them with your respective country team, and we will follow up with them accordingly. And then we get to the next question, which is, after receipt of the allocation letter, is the 30-day deadline for PR nomination strictly observed? Is it possible to request for an extension? So from our side, this 30-day deadline is really highly recommended, especially for applicants that want to come for our TRP window in 2026. However, it is possible to request an extension. For example, as it says here, if there's more time needed to complete the CCM meetings to confirm the PR nomination, then we want to ensure that the CCMs have time to do so. In these cases, again, please reach out to your respective country team focal points to then discuss the implications of this and next steps and any deviations from the expected timeline. And again, in the meantime, the CCMs can consult published application documents to begin thinking about the funding request development in parallel. So I think these are the questions that I have for now. I'm not sure if I'm just missing any additional questions. However, I know we are just about at the close of today's session. So if there are any additional questions that you have come up with and you would like answers to, again, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will share some answers with you. Or please reach out to your funding request country teams, who will then be able to provide additional information. So with that, we have come now to the conclusion of this session. Thank you again, everybody, for your participation today. Thank you again for your time today. And we wish you the best of luck on the funding request development. And a big thanks to the colleagues that participated today as well. I see as well some of my colleagues have given answers to some of the questions that were posed in the chat. We will try to directly reply to all of those questions, as well as share some of these answers with all of you later. And again, we will share with you a recording of this session alongside some demo videos and some step-by-step manuals that CCMs can follow for both their classic or their grant-ready funding request submission for Grant Cycle 8. So with that, a big thanks to everybody for your time today, and wishing you a great rest of the day from wherever you're calling in again. So thanks again and take care.